moving on to our second topic, which is from the forums. This is one that we haven't done before, but some people may know that we have.
What? We haven't read our Discord before?
We've never read our Discord, ever. I don't think we actually ever had like a specific feature or anything that was about all the wonderful conversation that goes on in our forums. But good news, folks.
I don't think we've
does.
ever had conversation in there.
Yeah, I know. That wasn't just us talking. But it has very much happened in the new forum more than even in the last one, which I am super happy about. And so the conversation from about a week ago, a week or two, I suppose, was being done by a few people that we have that are common contributors there. And they were talking about an article from the Angry GM, which was about, let me just see, it was titled Memo to the Players #1, Taking Action. Now, I think the reason why this originally came up was because someone that was on our forums that people might be familiar with, Datum, was interested in player-facing content and advice. And so then there was a little bit of discussion about whether we like, who likes Angry and who doesn't, but also just the discussion of, is the advice good advice? So I wouldn't get into too much about thoughts on Angry. We kind of know him secondhand removed slightly. We know him a little bit, and I'm familiar with a lot of his work, mostly from GM Word of the Week and when they were doing Digressions and Dragons and stuff like that. And we're familiar that he's doing a character for the most of that. But I think the thing that really confused me is this particular article that he wrote seems to be made specifically for people that are new to role-playing games or have very little experience with it. And that's more my field of expertise. I don't know what you're talking about. So me reading this after it was brought to my attention gave me some interesting thoughts on this. Did you get a chance to kind of look at it yourself?
Yeah, I mostly skimmed, to be honest. I didn't really have the patience in the car when I was reading it to read all thousands of words that it was.
Right.
But I did skim and read relevant pieces.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, and that is very similar to me as well, but I mean, I do have it up right now. The first part of this is basically, I mean, he does lay it out very clearly that he is going to teach the players exactly the stuff to do in the game. Taking actions, portraying characters, interacting, exploring, surviving, all sorts of crap like that is how he puts it. And he's doing this for GMs.
Seems like several different articles you could have written for content.
Yes. Well, you know, each one of these parts seems pretty small in terms of what he's talking about. But the idea, I guess, is that this is supposed to be sent to, I guess this is for GMs, that they will go and tell their players, and then this is information that the players then take and run with. That was my impression of how this information gets delineated out. The problem I'm seeing is that Angry has a persona, as the name probably implies, and if you are new to the game and are not familiar with all of that, you might be a little turned off by the presentation. Because it's not so much that the information is bad, for the most part, but I feel like the presentation might be a little bit off-putting if somebody just chucks it in a new player's face and says, here, the Angry GM wrote something, you read it now.
Yeah. And then the new player might be like, why is this guy being the authoritarian of gaming and how I play my game?
I know. What are
But
we going to do?
they might also get they might also get thoughts from the content of the article.
Yes, and so, and it's not that the advice is necessarily bad. I'm going to say that right now. Like when he starts off with the listen first and think second, I would actually appreciate people if they did that. Be aware of what people are saying and then act accordingly. So, some of what he's talking about, just to kind of summarize, I'll try to summarize as best I can, is to have your players be aware of their surroundings, be aware of what they're trying to do, and more importantly, be aware that you have a cat. You got to be aware of the cats, first of all. If you have a cat, how do you want to use the cat? Stuff like, okay, I want to pick a lock. Okay, how are you picking that lock? What are you doing with it?
I use my claw.
Yes, you use the claw. And I think that he actually mentions this, if I can find. Yeah, how do you open a lock chest, for instance? What kind of tools and resources do you have? And like, if you're dealing with an ogre, is he on the edge of a chasm? What is going on? How are you doing this thing? And I'd like players to be considerate of that. But at some point, I'd kind of hand wave away a lot of stuff, or just assume, like, all right, yeah, there's a tin can somewhere around. It makes some sense. Like, I shouldn't necessarily have to know every little tiny detail, but I can reasonably assume that there would be a thing here. So
Yeah.
So there's that, and also
I think awareness of the environment and the details of the environment are also really helpful. Because is he on the edge of a chasm? No. Then I can't push him in. Oh, he is. Well, now I'm gonna try to push him in.
right.
Or as you said, a tin can. It's like, is there any trash anywhere around? It's like, no, you're in the forest.
Yeah,
Why would there be a can in the forest?
exactly.
Some of those details are nice to have, and to be aware of as players and characters, because, again, the chasm makes a big difference in what you're going to do. Are you on the edge of the chasm? Is the ogre coming at you? Well, what happens if he pushes you in? What happens if you trip him in?
Mm-hmm.
Lots of things.
Yeah. On that note, when he gets into Memo to the Game Master, which is past that, there was something where I was like, oh yeah, I kind of see what he's saying. To give you some context, he talks about the practice of, I want to do X by Y using Z. So, like, I want to kill the ogre by stabbing him with my longsword. And one, I get the reason, again, why he thinks that's a good idea, because it keeps things clear and concise, but it also starts feeling way too much like a regulated game rather than a creative exercise like you kind of figure tabletop gaming will be. And maybe you can kind of play around with that a little bit more, but the general idea, this thing, this action, this target, not a bad. But again, if you're a new player, I have to wonder, like, are you going to take that way too literally and say, oh god, now I have to do I want to statements to do that. The thing that comes into play for me is when we get to the Game Master side of things, when he's saying don't fill in the blanks. And this is actually one that I would critique a little bit. What he kind of writes is, don't force your players to say... If you don't force your players to say the I want X by Y using Z, they won't learn. And if they leave something out, make them fill it in. I do feel like if you're new, you do expect that the GM will be able to hold your hand a little bit there, or at least to I don't want to sit there waiting for my player for 20 minutes to figure out what they're doing without guiding them to some degree, because it's just not, it's not interesting. It's not interesting.
No.
Yeah, and on that note, the other thing I think that really stood out for me was the don't answer questions about the rules. I don't know about that one. I don't know about that one. So the reason he says that is what he writes is, if a player asks you about the rules, they've got an ulterior motive and you've got to dig for it. Never make a ruling until you know exactly what you're ruling on. I don't know about that.
So I kind of see where he's coming from with that one, where you don't answer questions about the rules unless you know what they're trying to do. It's like, all right, well, that makes sense in the case that you don't want to give a ruling to something, and then your player suddenly pulls a peasant railgun out of their bag of holding and murders a demon lord suddenly, for instance. I get where that can be like, all right, that makes sense, because I'm not going to adjudicate, whatever, words are not going to happen. I'm not going to make a ruling for something if I don't know what it's going to be in reference to. For instance, use that, you would ask them for a ruling, do something, get them to rule it, figure out how to twist that rule and make it work for you later, if that's what you're going to do anyways. I don't think new players necessarily are the ones who are going to be doing that. It's your very peasant railgunny players who would be trying to pull that shenanigan level off on you. Right. But I can see where that would be decent advice, to not tell people exactly how the rule works without knowing what, like in your world, without telling them, or without finding out what they're trying to do. Like, oh yeah, raise the dead. Does it work like this? And you're like, yeah, it kind of works like this. And then a sudden army of necromancers. I don't know. I can see where it would come in handy, but I want your opinion on it.
Okay, because see, this, maybe this is just from my perspective or not, is that if I'm building a world, I should have a pretty good idea of how my world works. If a player asks a question about that world building, I shouldn't have to dig as to why they want it, because then that would force me to be saying, like, I'm going to try to modify the world because I don't want them to try something in the world that I built. And if somebody else is running the game, I would be like, well, in the rules that you've built, before you go and tell me I can't do something, if you're saying that these are the rules as written in your world, how the mechanics work, I might be able to take advantage of that. I might be able to do something with it, but hey, them's the rules that you set down. And if you say you want to know what I'm trying to do first, then are you going to try to modify your world so that I can't do that thing? And so I keep thinking, like you said, the bag of holding with a peasant railgun, but isn't that awesome too? Because everybody will remember the bag of holding and the peasant railgun. And what would have happened if they said, well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take out a bag of holding and I'd like to make a peasant railgun with a bag of holding. I kept all the peasants in there. And they say, oh, no, actually in this world, we don't do that with bags of holding. You got to check your peasants at the entrance of the bag of holding before that works. Sorry. It's like, well, there's a tremendous epic moment that you just threw away because you didn't want it to derail your game. I'm just thinking about, like, all the times where stories went in such an interesting new direction because the GM wasn't in control for that moment, realized that they had set something up that could be exploited or worked in a different way, and then the players took it off in a different direction. Whatever the game world is, if you really are the person that's in charge of the world building, I don't think you should have to rely on your players to like fact check before you come back to it and say, like figure out if they're going to exploit the world you built before you go back and do something about it. It's like saying that the rules are the rules, but I'm gonna wait till you say something to determine if that's actually the rule. And so from my perspective, I see that as maybe not the best way of actually presenting it. If you, however, have built the world and it comes up to a question that you had never asked yourself, I still think that, like, don't ask the players what they're trying to do with it. figure out how you want that to work that makes sense for the world first.
Yeah.
Then have if the players...
I agree with that.
Yeah. Then have the players figure out if they're going to exploit that, and then you can work with it after that. But I actually, and on the other hand, on the other point here, I like the idea of players trying to figure out, almost like a puzzle, how they can work the rules of that world, because it feels like they're actively engaged with what the world is and how it's being presented, and they're not just being sent through a series of events. So I guess that's probably the biggest point of contention I probably had with the article, and the biggest thing I would disagree with, because I think that just speaks to the relationship between the GM creating the world and the players playing in the world. It feels like the person trying to create the world has to continually modify and change the rules of the world based on what the players do, and then the players don't really feel like they have agency to work or change things inside of it. If that makes sense.
That makes sense. I concede to that making sense.
Okay, good. We concede to that making sense. I also think that on the one other note though, I did think Crave had made mention that it is kind of ironic where he talks about people don't need to play a character because they're not always like in some giant, streaming game, while Angry is definitely very much playing a character.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a bit of irony.
Yeah, a little bit. Good catch, Crave. I didn't think about that either. Just as a general, we'll end it soon, but when you look at this kind of information being presented from somebody who's obviously a big creator in the space, Angry's got a big following. Do you think that this helps bring people into the hobby of tabletop gaming, or do you think that it's more likely to be off-putting?
I feel like that's more likely to be off-putting to newer people, but I feel like it's not directed at people that are newer anyways.
Okay.
Like, facing-wise, it's directed at the newer players, or less experienced players, but it's not something like an article you would... I don't think you would present that article to new players and expect them to be like, oh yeah, that makes me totally want to play. It would probably be more off-putting to them.
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of see if he's thinking about presenting this a GM that's had players on the table for a while that are not getting it. And that might be what he's trying to accomplish here. However, if you're dealing with people that are not familiar with the system and you had them for like 1 or 2 sessions and things don't seem to be working out quite that well, this might not be the best thing to show them off the bat. When I was new into this not too long ago and I didn't have any experience, if I read this, my thought really would have been finding a different hobby. Just not even gonna bother. This is the landscape, apparently. This is my only input into it. I guess I'm just gonna walk away now. I'll eat pizza and Doritos without a piece of paper in front of me.
Yeah, you can just eat pizza and Doritos and Mountain Dew without needing to play role-playing games. That's allowed.
Yeah, you could do that. Why bother with all of this? This seems way too I thought we were having a game. Like, this feels way too much... I think that's right. This feels way too much like board game rules. And I don't really think that a lot of people that are playing tabletop gaming really wants it to feel too much like a board game. They want it to feel like a very unique experience where they have creative freedom and are able to do things outside the realm of just general rules. And so I think that I can kind of understand where people might have had a little bit of an issue with that. But I am also really happy that Angry was trying to do some player-facing content, because like so many people in the comments had mentioned in the forums, is that is not always... that is not usually what people focus on. They usually focus on GM rules.
Yeah. On the flip side, what we need to do is figure out a party game style light RPG
Mm.
that you can do and introduce new players into role playing. Very easy with rules light and super fun on the fly. That's something we need to look into, Nathan.
Yeah, I'm sure that they exist, and I just don't know of an example off the bat. However, good news, we have both a Discord, and we have a Twitter account, and we have an email account, and we even have the ability for you to send a voice on our Spotify. So if you can think of any of those rules light systems that are good for introducing players into TTRPGs, please tell us. We would very much like to know about them. We might even talk about them on the show. In a segment just
True.
like this.
We might even have the creator of them on the show. Who knows?
You never know. Do we have that much pull? Time will tell. We'll see how that ages, too. We have in the past. I don't know if we...
That'll age poorly.
This segment aged like milk. Anyway.